Hello, and welcome to How Much Does a President Cost? Explained by me, PopVote. How much money do we spend on the president each term? How much did Bush cost? What about Obama? What are the costs of a president I don't know about? We'll get to all these and more, but let's start simple by answering the question behind this video. Having a president costs Americans $20 billion every 4 years. Well, sort of. You see, it depends on how you define the cost of a president. You might define the cost of a president as the total price of keeping the first family alive, maintaining the White House, and every other expense allocated to the commander-in-chief's use. But mind you, we might as well call this the head of state tax, because all governments must pay these expenses, regardless of whether they have a prime minister, king, or dictator. For example, America's head of state tax amounts to $1.5 billion every year, or $6 billion over one term of the presidency, which may seem like a lot until we account for the staggering amount the president must travel compared to other countries' leaders. In other words, the head of state tax isn't wasted. But elections, well, they're another story. In the 2012 presidential election, Americans contributed $2.4 billion to presidential candidates. And that $2.4 billion is an underestimate that does not begin to account for the unknowable costs of an election, like the lost productivity of volunteers and the amount of money spent on ads not required to be reported to the FEC. Unlike the head of state tax, America nor any other country needs to spend this much on an election. In fact, the combined cost of electing the entire federal governments of the UK, Japan, and Russia was under $1 billion, which really puts America to shame because we regularly spend more than twice that to elect just one government official. Now we could stop here and calculate the direct cost of the president to be a tidy $8.4 billion every term, but then we would have to forgo the fun of considering the cost of policies supported by government officials for the sole purpose of electing the president, or the cost of crony capitalist legislation. For example, the US mandates that gasoline sellers blend corn ethanol into their fuel, despite the fact that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the International Food Policy Research Institute have called on the US to suspend such mandates as they raise world food prices significantly. On top of that, the EPA has determined that increasing the amount of ethanol in our fuel contributes to air pollution. So why does this mandate exist? It's simple. Iowa. Iowa is the country's biggest ethanol producer and, more importantly, a swing state. For those who don't know, a swing state is a state where the two major presidential candidates have a close race. There are currently 10 of them, and they are the only states that matter when electing the president. And as is the cardinal rule of both parties, you do not piss off a swing state. This is why politicians subsidize corn to the tune of $14.6 billion a year. If that's not enough for you, look at sugar. It should come as no surprise to you that the US is bad at growing sugar. Due to our cold climate, it costs us significantly more to make sugar than other warmer countries. In 2012, the US price for a metric ton of sugar was $375 higher than the world price. Our sugar is ridiculously expensive. But that does not stop the US government from limiting the amount of cheap foreign sugar in the name of bad reasons. The most common of these is undoubtedly keep American jobs. But I wouldn't recommend betting on sugar as the savior of the American economy. For every sugar job we've kept due to these policies, we've lost 3 food manufacturing jobs. 3 for 1. Does that sound like a fair deal? Oh, and speaking of fair deals, due to our ridiculous sugar policy, Americans pay $14 billion extra for food every 4 years. So if it costs us jobs and money, why do we have this policy? Once again, it's simple. Old man Florida, the country's leading producer of sugarcane, is a swing state, and when Florida gets cranky, it screws up elections. So politicians keep Florida happy. And what keeps Florida happy? Sugar. In the months preceding the 2004 election, the Bush administration pulled sugar from a deal that opened up US and Australian farm markets. Why? Because old man Florida doesn't want to compete with Australian sugar, which costs significantly less. The US consistently shelters sugar from trade with other countries and subsidizes sugar to the expense of taxpayers. So what's the final tally for the cost of a president for one term? Well, the head of state tax is around $6 billion, and elections cost around $2.4 billion. But after that, it's hard to say. How much do we include of the $14.6 billion in corn subsidies, or the $14 billion extra we spend on sugar every 4 years, and the 89,000 food manufacturing jobs lost due to irresponsible sugar policy? And what about the billions of other dollars we spend on policies, subsidies, and regulations aimed at keeping the White House blue or red? I don't view these as the costs of any given president, but as the costs of America's electoral system that causes the problems of these 10 states to matter more than the rest. You see, I don't think politicians want to spend billions a year on policies that are counterproductive for the majority of Americans. I think politicians, like the rest of us, want the best for their country, but the Electoral College system forces them to focus on the well-being of a few. We need to reform the Electoral College system if we ever want truly fair elections. Greetings, Internet! If you're interested in how America can reform its electoral system without abolishing the Electoral College, click up here. Oh, and if you like facts, links are in the description. See you next time.